Jesse Owens was born into a country that spoke the language of freedom while practicing the reality of exclusion. When James Cleveland Owens came into the world on September 12, 1913, in Oakville, Alabama, the United States was still deeply fractured by the legacy of slavery and the rigid laws of racial segregation. His grandparents had been enslaved. His parents, Henry and Emma Owens, worked as sharecroppers, bound to land they did not own, trapped in a system designed to keep black families permanently poor. Jesse was the 10th child in a household where survival required constant labor and sacrifice. Hunger was not an exception, it was routine. Education was limited, medical care was scarce. Childhood as it existed for white Americans was a luxury Jesse Owens never truly experienced. From an early age, Jesse's body carried the marks of hardship. He suffered from chronic respiratory illnesses that left him weak and frequently bedridden. Many believed he would grow into adulthood fragile and limited. Yet there was something paradoxical about him. When he ran, his body seemed to forget its limitations. Speed became his refuge. Running offered escape, not just from physical weakness, but from a society that told him daily what he could not be. In the fields of Alabama, among dust and heat, Jesse discovered that motion gave him freedom in a world determined to restrict him. In 1922, when Jesse was 9 years old, his family joined the Great Migration, one of the most significant demographic shifts in American history. Millions of black families fled the South, escaping racial terror, lynching, and economic exploitation. Cleveland, Ohio, promised industrial work and relative safety, though racism followed them north in subtler but persistent forms. It was there that a small misunderstanding reshaped Jesse's identity. On his first day of school, he introduced himself as JC. The teacher misunderstood and recorded his name as Jesse. That accidental renaming would follow him for the rest of his life, symbolic of how forces beyond his control continually shaped his story. In Cleveland's public schools, Jesse's athletic talent began to draw attention. Teachers noticed that he ran with an effortless rhythm, his strides long and economical. He jumped farther than boys years older than him. Yet even as his reputation grew, his life remained harsh. Jesse worked relentlessly, shining shoes, delivering groceries, pumping gas, and later working night shifts as an elevator operator. Sleep was irregular. Meals were inconsistent. Training often came after exhaustion. Athletics were not yet a path to fame or financial security, especially not for a black teenager in the early 1930s. During high school, Jesse Owens transformed from a local curiosity into a national phenomenon. At the National Interscholastic Championships in Chicago, he equaled the world record in the 100-yard dash, an achievement that stunned observers. Newspapers began printing his name. Coaches began calling. Colleges took notice. Yet opportunity came with limits. When Jesse chose Ohio State University, he did so knowing the institution offered no athletic scholarships. He would represent the school, break records for it, and bring it prestige, while still working multiple jobs to survive. At Ohio State, Jesse Owens lived two parallel lives. On the track, he was celebrated as a marvel of speed and coordination. Off the track, he was segregated, excluded from dormitories, barred from restaurants, and forced to stay in separate accommodations while traveling for competitions. Despite these indignities, his dominance only intensified. His defining moment came in May 1935 at the Big Ten Championships in Ann Arbor. Arriving injured after falling down a staircase, Owens doubted his ability to compete. He persuaded his coach to let him attempt just one race. What followed has been immortalized in sports history. In approximately 45 minutes, Jesse Owens broke 3 world records and tied a 4th in the 100-yard dash, long jump, 220-yard dash, and 220-yard hurdles. No athlete before or since had compressed such excellence into such a short span of time. This performance elevated Jesse Owens from elite athlete to global contender, just as the world's attention shifted toward Berlin. The 1936 Olympic Games were not merely a sporting event. They were a political spectacle orchestrated by the Nazi regime. Adolf Hitler understood the power of imagery. He believed that athletic dominance could legitimize ideology. The Olympics were meant to demonstrate German order, discipline, and racial superiority. Jewish athletes were systematically excluded from German teams. Roma people were erased from public view. Berlin was cosmetically cleansed. Anti-Semitic signs were removed temporarily. Foreign journalists were carefully managed. For 16 days, Germany attempted to disguise tyranny as hospitality. International reaction before the Games was conflicted. Some nations called for boycotts. Many athletes debated whether participation meant complicity. Ultimately, most countries attended, believing sport could exist apart from politics. Jesse Owens arrived not as a political activist, but as a competitor, yet his very presence undermined the purpose of the Games. From the moment competition began, Owens dominated. He won the 100 meters with authority. He followed with victory in the long jump, defeating Germany's golden boy, Lutz Long. That competition became legendary not only for the result, but for the humanity displayed within it. Long, fully aware of the political symbolism surrounding him, approached Owens during qualifying and offered technical advice to help him avoid fouling. Owens accepted. He adjusted his takeoff. He jumped farther than anyone else. He won gold. The two men walked arm in arm through the stadium, a quiet act of defiance against the ideology surrounding them. The German crowd, to the shock of Nazi officials, applauded Owens loudly. Inside Nazi leadership circles, reaction was tense. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels attempted to downplay Owens's victories, emphasizing Germany's overall medal count instead. Nazi newspapers avoided celebrating him by name. Some racial theorists scrambled to explain his success, suggesting pseudo-scientific justifications that contradicted their own ideology. Privately, many officials were furious. Hitler's visible absence during medal ceremonies became symbolic. Whether he intentionally avoided Owens or followed Olympic protocol remains debated, but the image endured, the dictator refusing to acknowledge the man who shattered his myth. Internationally, the reaction was electric. Newspapers across Europe and the Americas framed Owens as a hero. In black communities worldwide, his victories carried immense symbolic weight. He was not simply winning races, he was disproving a worldview. In France and Britain, editorials openly mocked Nazi racial theory. In Germany itself, ordinary citizens reportedly admired Owens despite official silence. His success exposed a rift between ideology and human reality. Yet the cruelest irony awaited him at home. When Jesse Owens returned to the United States, he was greeted with parades and applause, but not equality. He was celebrated as an athlete, not respected as a citizen. At a hotel banquet held in his honor, he was forced to use the service elevator. He could not dine freely. He could not secure endorsements. He could not capitalize on his fame. America applauded his victories abroad while maintaining segregation at home. To survive, Owens turned to exhibition races, competing against horses, motorcycles, and automobiles. These events drew massive crowds, but sporting authorities viewed them as degrading. He was stripped of his amateur status, effectively ending his Olympic career. Critics accused him of cheapening his legacy. Owens understood something they did not. Medals did not pay bills. The rest of Jesse Owens' life unfolded far from the spotlight. He worked as a playground director, believing deeply in the power of sport to guide underprivileged youth. He traveled extensively as a speaker and informal ambassador, often treated with more dignity overseas than in his own country. He represented American ideals abroad while quietly enduring American contradictions at home. Only later in life did Owens publicly confront the deeper meaning of his experience. He acknowledged the painful irony of humiliating Hitler while living under segregation. His realization was understated but profound. Tyranny, he came to understand, was not limited to dictatorships. It could exist within democracies, hidden behind laws and traditions. Jesse Owens died on March 31, 1980, from lung cancer. The honors came late but meaningful. The Presidential Medal of Freedom, national tributes, historical recognition. Yet his greatest legacy was already secure. Jesse Owens did not shout slogans or raise fists. He ran. And by running, he exposed lies that entire regimes were built upon. In the days that followed Jesse Owens' victories in Berlin, the Nazi regime faced an uncomfortable dilemma. Publicly, Germany had staged what appeared to be a triumphant Olympic Games. The country finished at the top of the medal table, and Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda, worked tirelessly to ensure that headlines emphasized German organization, discipline, and athletic depth rather than individual embarrassments. Privately, however, Owens's success represented a profound ideological failure. The Nazi worldview depended on the belief that physical, intellectual, and moral superiority were biologically determined by race. Jesse Owens, a black American descended from enslaved people, had dismantled that belief not through argument, but through undeniable performance, witnessed by millions. German newspapers were instructed to handle Owens carefully. His name was mentioned, but rarely celebrated. Articles emphasized that Germany still dominated the Games overall, framing Owens as an exception rather than a contradiction. Some publications attempted to rationalize his victories using distorted racial logic, suggesting that black athletes possessed primitive physical traits that made them faster but supposedly inferior in intelligence and discipline. These pseudoscientific explanations revealed the desperation of an ideology scrambling to protect itself from reality. Among ordinary German spectators, however, the reaction was often very different. Many had watched Owens compete with awe. Accounts from visitors and athletes suggest that crowds cheered him loudly, sometimes louder than German competitors, an act that quietly unsettled Nazi officials who expected uniform loyalty to the regime's message. Internationally, the response was swift and powerful. Newspapers across Europe and North America seized upon the symbolism of Owens' victories. In France and the United Kingdom, editorials openly mocked Hitler's racial theories, portraying Jesse Owens as living proof that the Nazi worldview was built on lies. In the United States, mainstream newspapers celebrated his achievements as a national triumph, often framing him as an American hero who had embarrassed a foreign dictator. Yet this praise was carefully sanitized. Many white-owned publications focused on the geopolitical humiliation of Hitler while avoiding any serious discussion of racism within America itself. Owens was useful as a symbol abroad, but inconvenient as a mirror at home. In black American communities, the meaning of Owens's victories ran far deeper. Black newspapers such as the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender treated his performance as a moment of collective pride and vindication. For many African Americans living under segregation, Jesse Owens' triumph was not simply athletic. It was existential. He had succeeded on a global stage that denied his humanity, and in doing so, he had forced the world to witness black excellence in its most visible form. Churches, community centers, and schools followed the Olympic results closely, seeing in Owens a rare moment when injustice was publicly contradicted rather than quietly endured. Despite this global recognition, the silence of American political leadership was striking. President Franklin D. Roosevelt never invited Jesse Owens to the White House. There was no official presidential reception, no public acknowledgement from the nation's highest office. The reason was widely understood, even if rarely stated openly. Roosevelt depended on the support of Southern segregationists, and honoring a black athlete too prominently risked political backlash. Owens later reflected bitterly on this omission, noting that while he had been willing to represent his country abroad, his country was unwilling to fully recognize him at home. The contrast between international admiration and domestic indifference would become one of the defining contradictions of his life. As Nazi Germany moved beyond the Olympics and returned to its policies of exclusion and aggression, Jesse Owens' image lingered uncomfortably within the regime's collective memory. 2 days after the Games ended, Wolfgang Fürstner, the commandant of the Olympic Village and a decorated officer, took his own life after learning he had been dismissed from the army due to his Jewish ancestry. The brief illusion of tolerance created for the Olympics collapsed almost immediately. Within 3 years, Europe would descend into war. The smiling crowds, the orderly stadiums, and the polished propaganda of 1936 would be revealed as a facade masking one of history's greatest atrocities. In retrospect, Jesse Owens, standing atop the podium in Berlin, would come to symbolize not just athletic greatness, but a fleeting moment when truth pierced through deception. For Owens himself, the years following the Olympics were marked by disillusionment and adaptation. His amateur status revoked, He was forced to navigate a society that had celebrated his victories but offered no structural support. He struggled financially, took whatever work he could find, and gradually faded from the national spotlight. Yet he never abandoned his belief in the power of sport to shape lives. As a playground director in Cleveland and later as a mentor and speaker, Owens devoted himself to young people, especially those growing up under circumstances similar to his own. He spoke not of revenge or anger, but of discipline, patience, and self-belief, values forged through hardship rather than ideology. During the civil rights era of the 1950s and 1960s, Jesse Owens occupied a complex and sometimes controversial position. He admired progress but remained skeptical of confrontation. When younger athletes used the Olympic stage to protest racial injustice, Owens expressed discomfort, believing that sport should remain separate from politics. Critics accused him of being out of touch, of failing to recognize that silence itself could be political. In later years, Owens acknowledged that his perspective had been shaped by survival. He had grown up in a world where protest often led to violence or death, and his instinct had been to endure rather than challenge openly. This admission added another layer of humanity to his legacy, revealing a man shaped by fear as much as courage. As historians revisited the 1936 Olympics decades later, the significance of Jesse Owens's achievements only grew. Scholars analyzed how Nazi propaganda had attempted to control narrative, how international media had selectively framed his victories, and how America's racial contradictions were laid bare by its treatment of its own hero. In Germany, post-war generations came to view Owens not as an enemy or embarrassment, but as a symbol of moral clarity in a dark chapter of their history. Streets, schools, and memorials reference the moment when ideology failed in front of the world's eyes. By the time Jesse Owens received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1976, the meaning of his life had expanded far beyond track and field. He had become a symbol of resilience, contradiction, and quiet resistance. When he died in 1980, tributes poured in from around the world. President Jimmy Carter described him as a man who symbolized the human struggle against tyranny, poverty, and bigotry. Yet even those words felt incomplete. Jesse Owens had not set out to challenge Hitler, reshape history, or represent an entire race. He had simply run, and in running he had forced humanity to confront its lies. Today, when historians look back on the 20th century, the image of Jesse Owens in Berlin endures not because of the medals he won, but because of the truths his victories revealed. He exposed the fragility of hatred masquerading as science. He demonstrated that excellence could emerge from the margins, and he reminded the world that even in moments carefully designed to deceive, reality has a way of breaking through. Jesse Owens did not speak loudly, but his footsteps echoed across history. The images most people remember from the 1936 Berlin Olympics show Jesse Owens smiling atop the podium, gold medals hanging from his neck, as flags rise and crowds applaud. What history often overlooks, however, is what happened away from the track, in the silent corridors of the stadium, in the restrained glances exchanged among Nazi officials, foreign journalists, and members of Hitler's inner circle. These games had been meticulously prepared as a global propaganda spectacle. Germany wanted to present itself as reborn, disciplined, modern, and above all, racially superior. Jesse Owens did not merely win races. He dismantled, in front of the world's cameras, the ideological core of Nazism. The official reaction of the Nazi regime was cold, calculated, and tightly controlled. German newspapers were instructed to downplay Owens's achievements. His name rarely dominated headlines, his photographs were reduced, and his records described in technical, almost emotionless language. The word humiliation never appeared in print, yet it echoed through the regime's private chambers. Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda, dismissed the victories of black athletes as biological anomalies, attempting to frame Owens's dominance as a physical aberration rather than proof of human equality. For Hitler, who had personally attended several events, each of Owens's victories struck directly at the worldview upon which his empire was built. Within this oppressive atmosphere emerged one of the most profound and human stories of the entire Games. Jesse Owens' friendship with German long jumper Lutz Long. Long was everything the Nazi regime admired. Tall, blonde, technically flawless, and impeccably composed, he was promoted as the ideal Aryan athlete. In the long jump, his signature event, Long was expected to win gold. Owens, after fouling on his first 2 attempts during qualification, stood on the brink of elimination. In a moment that defied ideology, Long approached Owens and offered simple technical advice. Begin his takeoff a few inches earlier to ensure a legal jump. Owens listened. He adjusted his run. He qualified. In the final, Owens surpassed Long and claimed another gold medal, while Long settled for silver. What followed was impossible for propaganda to erase. The 2 men embraced, walking arm in arm, beneath banners bearing the swastika. That image traveled far beyond Berlin. Owens would later say that Lutz Long represented the true spirit of the Olympic Games. Long's story ended tragically. Drafted into the German army, he was killed in action in Sicily in 1943 during World War II. Before his death, Long wrote a letter to Owens, asking him to find his son if he survived the war and tell him who his father truly was. Years later, Jesse Owens honored that request, meeting Long's family and preserving a friendship born in the most unlikely of places, under the shadow of Nazism. Outside Germany, the world reacted with astonishment. In the United States, newspapers celebrated Owens as a national hero, but with careful restraint. He was praised as an athlete, never as a social symbol. In Europe, particularly in nations already wary of Hitler's ambitions, Owens's victories were interpreted as cracks in the illusion of Aryan invincibility. Within black communities across the world, Jesse Owens became something far greater than a champion. He became proof, living, breathing proof, that dignity, excellence, and humanity could thrive even under the weight of hatred. Yet when the Olympic flame was extinguished and athletes returned home, the injustice of reality quickly reasserted itself. Owens returned to the United States as a 4-time Olympic champion, but not as an equal citizen. There were no endorsement deals, no invitations to the White House, no financial security. The same country that had celebrated his symbolic victory over Nazi ideology refused to confront its own segregation. Owens was still barred from sitting at the front of buses, entering through the main doors of hotels, or using the same elevators as white Americans. This contradiction shaped the rest of his life. To support his family, Owens accepted exhibition races that the sporting establishment viewed as humiliating, running against horses, dogs, even automobiles. These events were not born of spectacle but necessity. For this, he was stripped of his amateur status, punished for surviving in a system that offered him no alternative. Yet Owens refused to become bitter. He worked modest jobs, became a public speaker, an educator, and an informal ambassador. He dedicated much of his life to working with underprivileged youth, believing that his story carried responsibility. As decades passed, Jesse Owens' significance deepened. He came to be viewed as a forerunner to figures such as Jackie Robinson, who broke baseball's color barrier, and Muhammad Ali, who openly challenged political and racial injustice. Owens, however, was different. He was not a vocal revolutionary. His defiance was unintentional, almost accidental. He did not raise a fist on the podium, but his mere presence there, at that moment in history, carried a force as powerful as any protest. When Tommy Smith and John Carlos raised their fists at the 1968 Mexico City Olympics, the world had changed, in part because Jesse Owens had come before them. Though Owens criticized their gesture at the time, he would later acknowledge that athletic excellence alone could not dismantle injustice. In his final years, he spoke more openly about the painful parallels between Nazi Germany and segregated America. After all the stories about Hitler refusing to shake his hand, Owens reflected bitterly. He returned home to a country where he could not sit at the front of a bus. To him, the difference was not moral, only structural. Jesse Owens died in 1980 from complications related to lung cancer, in a nation that recognized his greatness fully only after his passing. Honors came later: presidential medals, statues, schools bearing his name, foundations dedicated to his legacy. But his true monument is not made of stone. It exists in memory, in the fact that, during one of the darkest chapters of the 20th century, a young black man, the son of a sharecropper, the grandson of enslaved people, ran faster, jumped farther, and revealed a truth no ideology built on hatred could survive. In the end, Jesse Owens did not defeat Hitler merely on the tracks of Berlin. He defeated him in the court of history. Empires collapse, regimes vanish, flags are lowered. But certain images endure, and among them is the image of a young American standing tall on the podium as the world learned, if only for a moment, that greatness has no color, and that human dignity will always cross the finish line first.